Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. They executed a deadly predator for loving humans. But its revenge shocked the world. The air inside the Galactic Council chamber was thick with tension, the kind that weighed on the soul. Elias Harrow, a battle-hardened human soldier, sat at the back of the Grand Hall watching the scene unfold with a mixture of disbelief and helplessness. In the center of the room, flanked by heavily armed guards, stood the towering figure of a creature many in the galaxy feared, an apex war predator known as the Terror. With a body covered in impenetrable scales and standing nearly 12 foot tall, the Terror, called Titan by the soldiers who fought beside it, was a terrifying yet majestic creature. Its silver reflective eyes betrayed a sense of intelligence that most of the galaxy refused to acknowledge. Titan had been one of the most lethal assets in the War of the Rift, a creature bred and trained to fight alongside human soldiers, where it had earned a reputation for its loyalty and unyielding courage. But now it was on trial. The charges against Titan were simple yet devastating: treason to its kind. The Galactic Council had deemed that Titan, along with others of its species, had acted as traitors for siding with the human forces instead of resisting them during the war. Many in the council argued that these creatures were dangerous, unpredictable, and most importantly, not to be trusted, and for that Titan was sentenced to death. "Let it be known," boomed the voice of High Counselor Vaughn, his words echoing in the Grand Hall, "that the creature known as the Terror, for its betrayal of its own species and its dangerous alliance with humanity, is hereby sentenced to be terminated. Its threat to the galaxy must be neutralized for the greater good of all." A gavel struck, a sound that rang with finality. Elias's fists clenched in his lap. He had fought alongside Titan, seen the creature protect his squad, and watched it shield soldiers in the heat of battle. To him, Titan was more than a beast of war, it was a comrade, a sentient being with a sense of loyalty unmatched by most soldiers. He knew the council's decision was wrong, and it gnawed at his conscience. As the guards moved to escort Titan back to the facility where it was to await its execution, the creature didn't resist, it simply turned its head, its molten silver eyes meeting Elias's across the chamber. There was a silent understanding between them, a bond forged in the heat of battle. Elias couldn't stand by and let this happen. The cold doors of the Galactic Detention Facility were eerily silent that night, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of the containment lights. The prison was impenetrable, or so the council believed, but they hadn't accounted for Elias Harrow. He moved through the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. The layout of the facility was burned into his memory, a skill he had developed during his years of military service. He knew exactly where Titan was being held, and more importantly, he knew how to get in undetected. The consequences of what he was about to do raced through his mind, but he brushed them aside. He couldn't let them execute Titan for crimes it didn't commit. As he approached the secured chamber, Elias spotted the familiar red glow of the Terror containment field. The guards on duty were on high alert, their weapons holstered but ready. It was no secret that many feared the Terror even in captivity. Elias waited for the shift change, timing was everything. When the guards swapped posts, there was always a brief window, just a few minutes where security was lax, a flaw in the otherwise flawless system. His pulse quickened as the guards moved out of the chamber. Elias slipped from the shadows, using a stolen security card to bypass the first layer of access. He moved quickly and quietly, his mind focused on one thing: getting Titan out before anyone realized what was happening. When he finally reached the containment room, he paused, staring at the massive creature through the transparent energy barrier. Titan's silver eyes locked onto his once more, and this time there was no mistaking the recognition. It was as though Titan had known all along that Elias would come. "I'm getting you out of here," Elias whispered, more to himself than to the creature. He tapped into the control panel, overriding the security system with a code he had acquired from an old contact in the military. The energy barrier shimmered, then flickered out. Titan remained still, watching Elias with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. It wasn't fear he felt, though it was trust. Elias stepped forward, placing a hand on the creature's thick, armored hide. Come on, he urged, we don't have much time. Without a sound, Titan rose to its full height and followed Elias. The two of them moved through the winding corridors, careful to avoid detection. Every one of Elias's senses was on high alert. They slipped past patrols, ducked into maintenance shafts, and eventually reached the lower levels of the facility, where an old cargo tunnel led out into the wilderness. The tunnel was narrow, barely large enough for Titan to move through, but the creature followed without hesitation. Elias knew they were running out of time. The council would realize soon enough that Titan was missing. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged into the cool night air on the bar outskirts of the city. Titan let out a low growl, its nostrils flaring as it took in the unfamiliar surroundings, but it stayed close to Elias, waiting for his next move. Elias turned to the creature, his breath fogging in the cold air. I don't know where we're going yet, but I'm not letting them take you. For the first time in days, Elias felt a sense of hope. They were fugitives now, on the run from the most powerful authority in the galaxy, but he didn't care. All that mattered was that he had saved Titan, and as they vanished into the wilderness, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of their journey. Elias and Titan raced through the untamed wilderness, their breaths mingling with the cold night air. The barren landscape stretched for miles, a desolate terrain far from the reach of the Galactic Council's sensors. They needed to keep moving. Elias knew it was only a matter of time before the Council deployed their search drones to track them. The bond between Elias and Titan had grown even stronger since their daring escape. Though Titan towered over Elias and could have easily disappeared into the wilds alone, the creature stayed by his side, trusting him in the way only comrades in arms could. Elias still marveled at how Titan, a predator once feared for its destructive power, could show such unwavering loyalty. As they crossed the open plains of the planet Grios, Elias glanced up at the night sky. It was filled with stars, the faint glow of distant systems reminding him of the vastness of the galaxy, but in that moment, he felt very small, and the weight of what they had done pressed down on him. They were fugitives, hunted by the most powerful authority in the galaxy. After hours of running, they found a place to rest. The landscape shifted into rocky cliffs, offering shelter in the form of caves. Elias guided Titan inside one of the larger openings, and the creature curled up its massive body, blocking the entrance and making it impossible for anyone to approach without detection. Elias sat down, leaning against the cool rock wall. His mind buzzed with the reality of their situation. He knew the Council would stop at nothing to track them down, especially with the growing fear that Titan, now a renegade, posed a threat to the galaxy. Yet for all their power, the Council didn't understand the truth about the creature standing guard at the cave's entrance. They saw Titan as a weapon, a beast to be used or discarded, but Elias had seen its heart. Titan wasn't just a tool of war, it was a sentient being, capable of loyalty, compassion, and even sacrifice. As he sat there, Elias thought back to the war. The memories were vivid, chaos, destruction, and death, but through it all, Titan had been there, fighting alongside him, never faltering. There were moments when Elias had been sure he wouldn't make it out alive, but it was Titan who had saved him time and time again, throwing itself in the path of danger to protect its human comrades. Now it was Elias's turn to protect Titan. The sound of a distant drone echoed in the night, snapping Elias out of his thoughts. He rushed to Titan's side, signaling for the creature to remain still. They couldn't risk being seen. The drone's soft hum grew louder as it scanned the area, but after a few tense moments, it moved on. Elias let out a slow breath. They were safe for now. Tomorrow, we keep moving, Elias whispered to Titan, who responded with a low rumble, we'll head to the outer rim, somewhere they can't find us. As the drone sound faded into the night, Elias knew that the road ahead would be perilous. They were running out of time, and the galaxy would soon close in on them, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. The plan to escape to the outer rim wasn't going to be easy. Elias knew that venturing to the less patrolled regions of the galaxy was their best chance of finding safety, but the journey was long and resources were scarce. They needed to find temporary refuge somewhere to gather supplies and regroup before continuing their flight. That somewhere was the frontier planet of Drawn 4. Drawn 4 was a rugged mining world on the edge of the known galaxy, a place where outlaws, smugglers, and those who preferred to live outside the reach of the law found refuge. Elias had been to Drawn 4 once before during a military campaign, and he knew that its sprawling network of underground mining tunnels made it the perfect place to hide. If they could reach the planet, they could lay low and plan their next move. At dawn, Elias and Titan made their way to a spaceport, where Elias hoped to find a pilot willing to smuggle them off-planet. It wasn't easy. Most smugglers feared crossing the Galactic Council, especially after the escape of such a high-profile target. But after some convincing and the promise of a hefty payment from Elias's dwindling military savings, they found a pilot, a grizzled old smuggler named Rook, who agreed to take them to Drawn 4. The journey was tense. Titan had to remain in the ship's cargo hold, hidden from scanners. The smuggler's vessel was small, but it had the advantage of speed, and Rook knew how to avoid detection. "You've really stirred up a nest of hornets," Rook said as they broke through the atmosphere of Grios. "You and that beast, the Council's got half the galaxy looking for you." Elias leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "I didn't have a choice. They were going to kill it." Rook glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "I've heard stories about those things, how they rip through armies, leave nothing but wreckage. You're telling me it's loyal to you? It saved my life more times than I can count." Elias replied firmly, "It's not what they think it is." Rook shrugged. "Loyalty's a rare thing in this galaxy. I hope for your sake it's true." The rest of the trip was uneventful, but Elias couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Every passing ship, every flicker on the scanner, felt like the Council closing in on them. But as they descended toward Drawn 4's rocky surface, a sense of relief washed over him. They had made it for now. Drawn 4's main settlement was a dusty, sprawling mess of buildings that seemed to blend into the harsh rocky landscape. Elias led Titan off the ship, heading into the shadows. The people here were used to strange things, but a terror walking through the streets would still attract too much attention. They found refuge in the tunnels beneath the settlement, where the miners worked day and night. The underground network stretched for miles, providing them with ample space to hide. Elias paid a local contact for information and supplies, knowing he couldn't stay long but hoping to gather enough resources for their next move. Titan, though massive and out of place in the cramped tunnels, seemed surprisingly calm. Elias had always marveled at the creature's intelligence. It understood when to fight and when to remain hidden, and now it sensed the need for patience. As they settled into their temporary sanctuary, Elias began to hear whispers, stories of other soldiers who had fought alongside the Tirers during the war, who now questioned the Council's decision to condemn the creatures. It seemed that not everyone in the galaxy saw Titan as a threat. Some, like Elias, believed the Council was wrong. The seed of rebellion had been planted. Elias knew they couldn't stay on Drawn 4 forever, but for now they had found a brief moment of peace, and in that moment he realized something. This wasn't just about saving Titan anymore. This was about changing the way the galaxy viewed these creatures, about proving that loyalty and friendship could exist between species thought to be enemies. But the Council wasn't finished with them yet. Elias and Titan's journey was far from over, and the galaxy was closing in on them. Days passed quietly on Drawn 4, but Elias could feel the tension building. The underground network of smugglers and exiles was beginning to talk. Whispers of rebellion against the Galactic Council's oppressive policies were growing louder, and Elias's escape with Titan had become a symbol of resistance. It started small, one night while Elias and Titan were resting in their cave within the tunnels, when a group of miners approached him. At first, Elias was on edge, ready to defend himself and his companion, but the miners weren't hostile. They were curious and, more than that, they were inspired. "We've heard the stories," said one of the miners, a grizzled man with a cybernetic arm, "about how you saved the Tirer, how it fought beside you in the war. The Council wants us to believe these creatures are mindless, dangerous, but you've shown us something different." Elias exchanged a glance with Titan, who rumbled softly in response. "It's not just a story," Elias replied, his voice firm. "Titan is loyal, it fought to protect us, and now the council wants to kill it because they're afraid of what it represents." The miner nodded. "There are others like us scattered across the galaxy, soldiers, miners, civilians, people who fought alongside creatures like Titan and saw their loyalty firsthand. We don't believe the council has the right to execute them." Elias felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. "You're not alone in thinking that," he said. "The council sees them as weapons to be discarded, but they're more than that, they're sentient beings, loyal, intelligent, and deserving of a second chance." The miner leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "There's a group forming, a resistance. We're small, but we're growing. People are starting to question the council's control, especially after what they did to the Tirers. If we can rally enough support, we could force the council to reconsider their policies." Elias's mind raced. He had been focused on staying tight and safe, on running from the inevitable, but now he saw an opportunity. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about changing the galaxy's perception of creatures like Titan. The rebellion offered a chance to do that. "What do you need from me?" Elias asked. The miner's expression hardened. "Your story, your fight with the Tirer, is already spreading, but we need more than whispers. If you stand with us, if you're willing to fight for these creatures, we can rally others, soldiers, pilots, smugglers, they'll listen to a war hero like you." Elias hesitated. He had never considered himself a hero, but he knew what was at stake. The council wouldn't stop hunting Titan until it was dead, and there were others, other creatures, other soldiers, facing the same fate. This rebellion wasn't just a cause, it was a chance to save them all. "I'm in," Elias said, determination hardening in his voice. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." Word of the growing rebellion spread faster than Elias could have imagined across the galaxy. People were beginning to question the council's authority, fueled by the stories of Elias and Titan's escape. What had once been a quiet whisper of dissent had grown into something louder. Bolder resistance cells were forming on different planets, many of them inspired by the tale of the soldier and the Tirer who defied the Galactic Council. But the Council wasn't blind to this rising tide of rebellion, they knew the threat Elias posed. He wasn't just a fugitive anymore, he was a symbol of defiance. The Council began tightening their grip, deploying their most elite operatives to hunt him down. They knew that if they could capture Elias and execute Titan, they could crush the rebellion before it grew out of control. Elias was fully aware of the danger. Drawn 4 had become a temporary refuge, but it wouldn't remain safe for long. The Galactic Council had eyes everywhere, and it was only a matter of time before they tracked him down. As the pressure mounted, Elias realized that he needed to take the fight to them, not just for his own survival, but for the sake of the rebellion. It was during one of these tense days that the first attack came. Elias and Titan had been scouting the outskirts of the settlement when a series of explosions rocked the area. The unmistakable roar of Galactic Enforcer ships echoed in the sky as they descended upon Drawn 4. "They're here," Elias growled, pulling his blaster from its holster. "We have to move." Titan rumbled in agreement, its massive form already shifting into a defensive posture. The two of them sprinted through the rocky landscape, heading toward the underground tunnels where the rest of the resistance had taken refuge. As they ran, a squad of Enforcer drones appeared in the sky above them, their sleek forms cutting through the air like predators hunting their prey. Elias cursed under his breath and aimed his blaster, firing at the closest drone. The shot connected, sending the drone spiraling out of control before crashing into the ground in a fiery explosion. But the rest of the drones kept coming. Elias ducked behind a boulder, panting as he tried to catch his breath. "They won't stop until they have us," he muttered. "We need to lead them away from the settlement." Titan seemed to understand. With a low growl, the creature charged toward the incoming drones, its massive body making it a difficult target to hit. Elias followed close behind, firing at the drones whenever he had a clear shot. The two of them made for the open plains, drawing the Enforcers away from the settlement. It was a dangerous move out in the open, they were more vulnerable, but Elias knew they couldn't risk leading the enforcers to the civilians hiding underground. The drones circled around them, firing rapid bursts of plasma. One shot grazed Titan's armored side, causing the creature to let out a roar of pain, but it kept moving, determined to protect Elias. Elias fired another shot, taking out a second drone, but there were too many, they were being overwhelmed. Then something unexpected happened. From the cliffs above, a group of resistance fighters appeared, armed with heavy weapons and explosives. They rained fire down on the enforcer drones, catching them off guard. Within minutes, the remaining drones were destroyed, their wreckage littering the plains. Elias blinked in surprise as the leader of the resistance group, the miner he had spoken to earlier, approached him. "We couldn't let you fight this battle alone," the man said with a grin. "We're in this together." Elias nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. The rebellion was real, and it was growing stronger by the day. But as they regrouped, Elias knew that this was just the beginning. The Galactic Council wouldn't stop until they had crushed the resistance, and they would come for Titan with everything they had. "We need to prepare," Elias said, his voice grim. "The Council's not going to let this go. They'll send more troops, more ships, and when they do, we have to be ready." The miner nodded. "We'll fight. We're not afraid." Elias looked at Titan, who stood beside him, battered but unbroken. The creature's eyes glowed with the same fierce determination that Elias felt burning in his own chest. "We've got one advantage they don't," Elias said. "We've got each other." As the sun set over the rocky landscape of Drawn 4, Elias and Titan stood side by side, ready for whatever came next. The battle for freedom had only just begun. The rebellion was no longer a whisper in the shadows. The Galactic Council had caught wind of the growing unrest on Drawn 4, and their response was swift and brutal. Elite forces were mobilized, and soon the skies above the planet were filled with warships blocking the surface. The Council wasn't just coming for Elias and Titan, they were coming to crush the entire movement that had begun to rise in defiance of their rule. Elias stood at the entrance of the underground tunnels, watching the horizon as ships descended toward the settlement. His breath was steady, but his mind raced. They didn't have much time before the full might of the Council's forces would reach them. Inside the tunnels, the miners, smugglers, and resistance fighters prepared for battle, arming themselves with whatever weapons they could find. Titan, ever at Elias's side, growled softly, sensing the impending conflict. The creature had been through countless battles, but this time it wasn't just their lives on the line, it was the future of the rebellion and the fate of creatures like Titan across the galaxy. Elias turned to the gathered fighters. "We don't have the firepower to take on the entire Council fleet," he said, his voice loud and clear, "but we have the terrain on our side. We know these tunnels better than they do. We use that to our advantage, hit them where they're weakest, lure them in, and strike hard. We can't let them take this planet without a fight." The crowd nodded in grim agreement. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had one thing the Council forces didn't: Titan. The siege began at dawn. Council troops landed in waves, their heavy armor and advanced weaponry glinting under the rising sun. The resistance fighters retreated into the tunnels, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elias, Titan, and a small group of rebels led the first wave of counterattacks, using the narrow passages and hidden exits to ambush the Council forces. As the battle raged on, Elias fought with a focus he hadn't felt since the War of the Rift. His blaster was an extension of his arm, his movements precise and calculated. Titan, meanwhile, was a force of nature. The creature tore through the Council's ranks with brutal efficiency, its claws and powerful tail making short work of the heavily armored soldiers. But the Council had prepared for this. They sent in their elite squads, trained hunters tasked with capturing Titan alive, their weapons designed to neutralize the creature's strength. As they pressed deeper into the tunnels, the Council forces unleashed powerful energy nets and shock grenades, attempting to subdue the beast. Elias watched as one of the nets hit Titan, entangling the creature in a web of crackling energy. Titan roared in pain, its massive body thrashing against the restraint. Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted toward his companion, firing at the hunters with deadly precision. "Hold on, Titan!" Elias shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. With a well-placed shot, he destroyed the device powering the energy net, freeing Titan from its bonds. The creature staggered but quickly regained its footing, turning its furious gaze on the hunters with a deafening roar. Titan charged, scattering the elite squad in a flurry of destruction. The battle continued for hours. The resistance fighters used every trick they had to hold off the Council's forces, but as the day wore on, it became clear that they were fighting a losing battle. The Council's troops were too many, their resources too vast. One by one, the rebels began to fall back, retreating deeper into the tunnels as the enemy closed in. Elias, battered and exhausted, knew they couldn't hold out much longer. They needed a new plan, something to turn the tide. He gathered the remaining fighters in a hidden chamber deep within the tunnels, Titan standing protectively at his side. "We can't win this fight on the ground," he said, his voice rough from hours of combat. "The Council's got too many troops, too much firepower. But we can still make a difference. We've got to hit them where it hurts." He pointed toward the surface, where the Council's warships floated menacingly in the sky. "How?" one of the miners asked, fear evident in his voice. "We don't have ships, and those warships would tear us apart before we got close." Elias glanced at Titan, then back at the group. "We don't need to take them down ourselves. We just need to disable their command center. Without it, the Council won't be able to coordinate their forces. If we can knock out their central ship, the blockade will fall apart." The resistance fighters exchanged uncertain glances. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. "We'll need a distraction," Elias continued, "something big enough to draw their attention away from the command center. Titan and I can handle that. The rest of you, gather whatever explosives we've got left and get ready to move. We're taking the fight to them." The plan was risky, but it was their only hope. Elias and Titan led the charge, drawing the Council's forces away from the main command ship by launching a daring assault on one of their ground bases. Titan tore through the enemy lines, its roars echoing through the battlefield as it wrought havoc on the Council troops. Meanwhile, the rest of the resistance fighters made their way toward the command ship, using the chaos to slip through the enemy's defenses. The ground battle was fierce. Titan's ferocity, combined with Elias's tactical precision, kept the Council forces off balance, but they were outnumbered at every turn. Despite their efforts, Elias knew they couldn't hold out much longer. The Council's forces were closing in, and every passing minute brought them closer to being overwhelmed. Then, in the distance, Elias heard the explosion. The resistance fighters had made it to the command ship. A massive plume of fire and debris erupted from the center of the sky, and for a brief moment, the battlefield fell silent. The Council's warships, now without a central command, faltered. Confusion spread through their ranks as they struggled to regroup. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "They did it," he muttered, turning to Titan. The creature, bloody but still standing, rumbled in acknowledgement. But their victory came at a cost. As the Council's forces retreated in disarray, one of the remaining enemy ships fired a final, desperate shot toward the battlefield. The blast hit near where Elias and Titan stood, sending both of them flying through the air. Elias hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his body as the world spun around him. For a moment, everything was a blur. The sounds of battle faded, replaced by the ringing in his ears. Elias struggled to push himself up, his vision swimming as he searched for Titan. And then he saw it. Titan lay a few meters away, its massive body crumpled on the ground, blood seeping from a deep wound in its side. The creature let out a low, pained groan, its eyes half closed. "No," Elias whispered, crawling toward his fallen companion. "No, no, no, come on, Titan, stay with me." He reached Titan's side, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. The creature's breathing was shallow, its once powerful body now weak and broken. "You can't die on me," Elias said, his voice choked with emotion. "Not now, not after everything we've been through." Titan's eyes flickered open, and for a brief moment, they locked onto Elias's. There was no fear in the creature's gaze, only a quiet acceptance. Titan let out a soft rumble, a sound that Elias had come to recognize as its comfort. The creature who had fought beside him in countless battles, who had saved his life more times than he could count, was slipping away. Tears blurred Elias's vision as he held Titan's head in his lap, whispering words of gratitude and sorrow. The rebellion had won the day, but the cost had been too high. Titan, the fierce and loyal creature who had defied the galaxy to stand by Elias's side, took one final breath, and then the light in its eyes faded. Elias sat there, cradling his fallen companion as the smoke of the battlefield drifted away on the wind. He knelt beside Titan's lifeless body, his hands still pressed against the creature's thick, bloodied scales. The sounds of battle had faded, replaced by a suffocating silence that seemed to press down on him from all sides. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of the loss that now hollowed out his soul. The creature who had stood by his side, who had been more than just a war beast, Titan, his friend, was gone. But there was no time for grief. The victory they had fought for had come at a devastating cost, and Elias could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him even harder. He looked around the battlefield, where the remaining resistance fighters emerged from the tunnels, their faces smeared with dirt and exhaustion but alive. The Council's forces had retreated, their warships scattered and unable to coordinate without the command ship. The resistance had won, but the battle wasn't over. One of the resistance leaders approached Elias cautiously, his expression one of sorrow and respect as he glanced down at Titan. "I'm sorry," the man said quietly, "Titan saved us all." Elias nodded, his voice tight with emotion. "It didn't deserve this, none of them do." The man glanced up at the sky, where the remaining council ships hovered, struggling to reorganize. "We need to press our advantage, they're scattered, but if we don't act fast, they'll regroup. This might be our only chance to strike at the heart of the council." Elias stood slowly, his gaze lingering on Titan still for a moment longer, then with a deep breath he forced himself to focus. "Titan died protecting me, protecting them all. I won't let that sacrifice be in vain." "You're right," he said firmly, "we take the fight to them. We finish this." The resistance fighters rallied around him, their spirits bolstered by the unexpected victory but tempered by the losses they had endured. Elias led them with a newfound determination, fueled by the desire to ensure that creatures like Titan would never have to suffer under the Council's control again. The plan was simple but dangerous. The Council's warships were still in orbit, vulnerable without their command structure. Elias and the Resistance would strike at key targets, disabling the remaining ships and cutting off the Council's reinforcements. It was a high-stakes gambit, but if they succeeded, they could cripple the Council's military presence in the sector. As they moved toward the launch bay, preparing to commandeer the remaining ships, Elias felt the weight of Titan's absence more keenly than ever. But he also felt something else, an overwhelming sense of purpose. Titan's death had ignited a fire in him, a drive to ensure that the Council's oppressive rule would end not just for the Resistance but for every sentient creature in the galaxy. The battle in space was brutal. Elias and his fighters launched coordinated strikes against the Council's warships, using guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver their technologically superior enemies. One by one, the ships fell, their engines disabled, their weapons neutralized. Elias's ship, a battered old freighter that had been hastily retrofitted with weapons, weaved through the chaos of space combat. He barked orders to the crew, his mind sharp and focused despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. Every shot, every maneuver, was for Titan, for the creature who had fought beside him until the end. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the Council's ships was crippled, drifting powerless in the vacuum of space. The Resistance had won. Weeks later, the galaxy was still reeling from the shock of the Resistance's victory. The Galactic Council, long seen as an unshakable force, had been dealt a blow from which it would not easily recover. Across star systems, news of the rebellion spread, and other oppressed planets began to rise up, inspired by the story of Elias and Titan. For the first time in years, the Council found itself on the defensive, its iron grip on the galaxy was slipping, and the tides of power were shifting. Elias stood on a grassy hill overlooking the vast plains of Drawn 4. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long time there was hope. The resistance was growing strong, new alliances were forming, and the Council's influence was waning. But none of that mattered to Elias in this moment. Today, he wasn't thinking about strategy or battles or the future of the galaxy, today was about Titan. The resistance had constructed a memorial for the creature that had become a symbol of their struggle. A towering stone monument, etched with images of Titan and battle, now stood at the highest point on Drawn 4, overlooking the place where the final battle had been fought. The inscription at the base of the monument read, "In honor of Titan, loyal to the end, protector of the free." Elias knelt before the monument, his hand resting on the cool stone. He had never been one for grand gestures, but this felt right. Titan had been more than just a weapon or a soldier, it had been a friend, a companion, and its loyalty had changed the course of history. "You should be here to see this," Elias murmured quietly. "We could have done it without you." The wind blew softly across the hill, carrying with it the distant sounds of the resistance preparing for their next move. But for now, in this moment, there was peace. As Elias stood, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see a small group of soldiers and resistance fighters approaching, led by the miner who had first spoken to him about the rebellion. "We wanted you to have this," the miner said, holding out a small metallic object. It was metal engraved with the symbol of the resistance and Titan's name. Elias took the metal, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you," he said quietly. The group lingered for a moment, paying their respects to Titan's monument before turning to leave. Elias stayed behind, staring out at the horizon. The war wasn't over and there was still so much work to be done, but today he allowed himself a moment of peace, a moment to remember that the galaxy would never forget Titan.